My father was arrested yesterday morning at his workplace in handcuffs, while his co-workers watched in shock. The charges include statutory rape, child endangerment, and obstruction of justice, spanning back 16 years. My mother was arrested 3 hours later for accessory after the fact and conspiracy to cover up a felony. Both of them are facing 20 to 30 years in prison, and their mugshots are all over the local news and social media. The family business they spent decades building is closed permanently after losing every client within 24 hours of the arrests. Their house is already listed for sale to pay legal fees. My siblings have publicly disowned them and changed their last names to distance themselves from the scandal. The church community that once respected them as model Christian parents has expelled them and issued a statement condemning their actions. 16 years ago, they convinced everyone that a vulnerable 16-year-old girl had tried to seduce my father. They destroyed her reputation, kicked her family out of our home, and forced her into therapy for years of trauma. Today, the truth finally came out, and their entire world collapsed in a single day. The lie they told to protect themselves became the evidence that guaranteed their destruction. My father went from respected business owner and church leader to registered sex offender facing decades in prison. My mother went from devoted wife and mother to accomplice in covering up child abuse. The perfect Christian family image they spent 16 years maintaining was exposed as a facade hiding the most disgusting kind of criminal behavior. The story of how I spent 16 years planning the complete destruction of two people who ruined an innocent girl's life started the day I realized my parents had lied to me about everything. The story of how this nuclear destruction of my parents' lives and reputation happened started 16 years ago, when I was 15 years old and still believed my parents were good Christian people who would never lie to me about something serious. We had been housing a divorced mother and her two daughters who were going through financial difficulties after escaping an abusive marriage. The family we were helping consisted of Maria, the mother, and her daughters Sophia, who was 14, and Elena, who was 16. They had been living with us for about 6 months, while Maria worked to save money for their own apartment. My parents presented this arrangement as Christian charity and an opportunity for our family to help people in desperate need. Elena and I had become close friends during their stay. She was mature for her age, having helped raise her younger sister and support her mother through the divorce and escape from abuse. She was kind, intelligent, and grateful for the stability our family provided during such a difficult time in her life. I admired her strength and resilience in handling such adult responsibilities at 16. My father seemed to take a special interest in helping Elena adjust to her new school and community. He would drive her to activities, help her with homework, and give her advice about planning for college. At the time, I thought he was just being a caring father figure to a girl who had not had positive male role models in her life. But one night, everything changed in a way that would haunt me for 16 years, until I finally understood the truth. I came home from spending the night at a friend's house to find my mother in the kitchen, crying, and Elena's family packing their belongings. My mother told me that Elena had tried to seduce my father the night before, and that we could not allow such a disturbed and manipulative girl to stay in our home any longer. She said Elena had been drinking and swimming without clothes in our pool, then tried to force herself on my father when he told her to get dressed and go inside. According to my mother's story, my father had resisted Elena's advances and immediately told my mother what happened. They decided that Elena was too psychologically damaged from her family situation to be around our family safely. My mother said Elena needed professional help, and that keeping her in our home would be enabling her inappropriate behavior toward adult men. But this was only the beginning of the character assassination my parents would conduct against an innocent 16-year-old girl. Over the following days and weeks, my parents spread their version of events throughout our church community and neighborhood. They painted Elena as a troubled teenager who had been traumatized by her family situation and was acting out sexually in dangerous ways. They claimed that she had been making inappropriate comments and advances toward my father for weeks before the incident. My mother told church ladies that Elena had been dressing provocatively and trying to get my father's attention. She said that Elena had behavioral problems and emotional issues that made her manipulative and deceitful. The story became more elaborate each time it was told, with Elena becoming increasingly predatory and my father becoming more of an innocent victim of a disturbed teenager's advances. The church community rallied around my parents as victims of a situation that had gone beyond their ability to help. People praised my father for his integrity in resisting temptation and immediately reporting the incident. They sympathized with my mother for having to deal with such a difficult and traumatic situation in her own home. Elena and her family disappeared from our community completely. I heard rumors that Elena had been placed in therapy and that her mother was struggling to find housing and employment after leaving our home so suddenly. Some people whispered that Elena's behavior was probably the result of previous sexual abuse and that she needed intensive psychological treatment. I didn't know yet that everything my parents told me and everyone else was a carefully constructed lie designed to cover up my father's criminal behavior. As I got older and developed a better understanding of adult relationships and psychological manipulation, the story my parents told about Elena began to feel wrong in ways I could not articulate. The Elena I knew had been mature, responsible, and respectful. The idea that she would suddenly become sexually aggressive toward my father seemed completely inconsistent with her personality and behavior. I also began to notice things about my father's character that made me question whether he was really the innocent victim in this situation. He had anger issues that were carefully hidden from the church community. He was controlling and manipulative with my mother and siblings. He had a pattern of inappropriate comments about young women and teenage girls that made me uncomfortable. When I reached my 20s and had more life experience, I started to suspect that my parents had lied about what really happened that night 16 years ago. The thought that an innocent girl had been victimized and then blamed for her own abuse haunted me. I decided that I needed to find Elena and learn the truth about what my father had done to her. That's when I knew exactly what I had to do to uncover the truth and get justice for Elena. I spent 3 years carefully planning exactly how I would investigate the truth about what happened 16 years ago, and gather evidence to destroy my parents if they had indeed covered up my father's criminal behavior. I knew that simply confronting them would result in more lies and manipulation. I needed concrete evidence and a strategy that would expose their crimes in a way that guaranteed legal consequences. My first step was to find Elena and convince her to tell me the truth about what my father had done to her. This was the most delicate part of my plan, because I knew that if Elena had been victimized, contacting her could be traumatic and potentially harmful. I had to approach the situation with extreme care and sensitivity. I spent months researching online and using social media to track down Elena and her family. I discovered that she had struggled with depression and anxiety for years after the incident. She had difficulty maintaining relationships and had been in and out of therapy since she was 16. Her life had been significantly impacted by whatever had happened in our home that night. When I finally found Elena, she was in her early 30s and working as a social worker, helping other survivors of sexual abuse. She had channeled her trauma into a career dedicated to protecting vulnerable people. When I reached out to her, she was initially hesitant to discuss what had happened, but she eventually agreed to meet with me because she wanted to know if my father had victimized other girls. What Elena told me was far worse than I had imagined and provided the evidence I needed to destroy my parents completely. Elena revealed that my father had been grooming her for weeks before the night of the assault. He had been giving her special attention, buying her gifts, and making inappropriate comments about her maturity and beauty. He had been gradually normalizing inappropriate physical contact and conversations about adult topics that made her uncomfortable, but that she did not know how to report. The night I was away at a friend's house, my father had provided alcohol to Elena and encouraged her to drink while they were alone by the pool. When she became intoxicated, he convinced her to go swimming and then removed her clothing while she was too drunk to resist effectively. He then sexually assaulted her while she was intoxicated and unable to consent. My mother had indeed walked in on them, but not because Elena was trying to seduce my father. My mother had found my father sexually assaulting an intoxicated 16-year-old girl. Instead of protecting Elena and reporting the crime, my mother chose to protect my father by creating a false narrative that blamed Elena for the assault. Elena told me that my mother had screamed at her, calling her names and accusing her of seducing a married man. My mother had threatened Elena and her family with homelessness and social destruction if Elena ever told anyone what really happened. She had convinced Elena that no one would believe her word against a respected man like my father. The psychological manipulation and victim blaming had been so effective that Elena had spent years believing that she was somehow responsible for what happened to her. She had struggled with guilt, shame, and self-blame that had affected every aspect of her adult life. The therapy my parents claimed she needed was indeed necessary, but not for the reasons they had told everyone. But Elena had kept evidence that would now destroy my parents' lives and freedom. Elena had secretly recorded some of her conversations with my mother in the days following the assault. On these recordings, my mother could be heard threatening Elena and coaching her on what story to tell if anyone asked questions. My mother had explicitly told Elena to say that she had been drinking and trying to seduce my father, and had threatened Elena's family with retaliation if she deviated from that story. Elena had also kept a journal during that time period, where she had written detailed accounts of my father's grooming behavior and the assault itself. She had documented dates, times, and specific details about my father's criminal behavior. This journal provided a contemporaneous account that would be powerful evidence in any legal proceeding. Most importantly, Elena told me that my father had not stopped his predatory behavior after she left our home. She had heard through mutual connections that he had continued to seek out opportunities to be alone with teenage girls through church activities and community organization. She suspected that he had victimized other girls over the years, but that they had been too intimidated or manipulated to report his crimes. I realized that my parents were not just guilty of covering up a single assault, but potentially of enabling years of continued predatory behavior against vulnerable teenage girls. My plan had 3 phases designed to ensure that my parents faced both legal consequences and complete social destruction. Phase 1 was gathering additional evidence and identifying other potential victims. I spent months researching my father's activities over the past 16 years, looking for patterns of behavior that might indicate continued predatory conduct. I reached out to families who had interacted with my father through church and community activities to see if anyone had concerns about his behavior with their daughters. What I discovered was a pattern of inappropriate behavior that had continued for years after Elena's assault. Multiple parents reported that my father had made them uncomfortable with his attention to their teenage daughters. Several girls now in their 20s told me about inappropriate comments and behavior from my father when they were teenagers. 2 other women came forward with accounts of sexual assault by my father when they were minors. The evidence I compiled painted a picture of a serial predator who had used his position in the church and community to access and victimize vulnerable teenage girls for over 16 years. My mother's cover-up of the original assault had enabled him to continue his criminal behavior with impunity. His reaction when he realized what I had done was priceless and exactly what I had hoped for. Phase 2 was reporting all of this evidence to law enforcement and ensuring that prosecutors understood the full scope of my parents' crimes. I contacted the district attorney's office and provided them with Elena's recordings, journal entries, and testimony. I also provided contact information for the other victims who were willing to testify about my father's criminal behavior. The prosecutors were particularly interested in my mother's role in covering up the original assault and enabling continued predatory behavior. The recordings of her threatening Alina and coaching her to lie provided clear evidence of obstruction of justice and accessory after the fact charges. Her actions had not just covered up a single crime, but had enabled years of continued victimization. The district attorney decided to pursue the most serious charges possible, given the evidence of serial predatory behavior and systematic cover-up. My father was charged with multiple counts of statutory rape, sexual assault, and child endangerment spanning 16 years. My mother was charged as an accessory after the fact and with conspiracy to obstruct justice. But I wasn't finished. The next phase guaranteed that their social and financial destruction would be as complete as their legal consequences. Phase 3 was ensuring that their crimes became public knowledge and that they faced complete social ostracism and financial ruin. I contacted local news media and provided them with information about the charges and the pattern of behavior that had been covered up for 16 years. The story of a respected church leader and business owner being charged with serial sexual assault of teenage girls made headlines immediately. The impact on their reputation and social standing was immediate and devastating. The church expelled both of my parents and issued a public statement condemning their actions and expressing support for the victims. The business community boycotted their company, and all of their clients canceled contracts within days of the arrests. Their social circle completely abandoned them as news of the charges spread throughout the community. People who had once respected them as model Christians were horrified to learn about the true nature of their character and behavior. The perfect family image they had maintained for 16 years was revealed to be a facade, hiding the most despicable kind of criminal conduct. The consequences were immediate and devastating for every aspect of their lives. My father lost his business immediately, as clients refused to work with a company owned by someone charged with serial sexual assault of minors. The business that had provided their income and social status for decades was worthless overnight. They were forced to liquidate assets to pay for legal representation and living expenses. My mother's role in covering up the crimes made her equally despised in the community. People could not understand how a mother could choose to protect a predator rather than innocent children. Her betrayal of Elena and the other victims was seen as particularly heinous because she had presented herself as a caring Christian woman who protected children. The psychological impact on my siblings was also severe. My younger brother and sister were horrified to learn the truth about our parents and struggled with guilt about having believed the lies about Elena for so many years. Both of them publicly disowned our parents and changed their last names to distance themselves from the scandal. And then their whole world completely collapsed when the full extent of the evidence became public during the trial. The trial revealed details about my father's predatory behavior that shocked even people who thought they understood the scope of his crimes. The prosecution presented evidence of systematic grooming, manipulation, and assault of vulnerable teenage girls over a 16-year period. The pattern of behavior showed that my father had deliberately sought out opportunities to access and victimize minors through positions of trust and authority. My mother's recordings were played in court, allowing everyone to hear her threatening and manipulating a traumatized 16-year-old girl to protect her predator husband. The jury could hear in her own voice how she had chosen to enable continued criminal behavior rather than protect innocent children from a serial predator. Elena's testimony was particularly powerful because she had become a successful advocate for abuse survivors despite the trauma my parents had inflicted on her. Her strength and resilience contrasted sharply with my parents' cowardice and selfishness. The jury could see how my parents' actions had affected not just Elena but all of the subsequent victims who could have been protected if they had reported the original crime. The convictions were swift, and the sentences were severe. My father was sentenced to 30 years in prison without possibility of parole for 25 years. My mother received 15 years for her role in covering up the crimes and enabling continued victimization. Both of them will be registered sex offenders and will face a lifetime of restrictions and monitoring if they are ever released. The civil lawsuits filed by the victims resulted in judgments that stripped my parents of any remaining assets and ensured that they will never financially recover from their crimes. The family home, business assets, and retirement savings were all awarded to the victims as compensation for the trauma and damage my parents had caused. 2 years after exposing my parents' crimes and watching them face the full consequences of their actions, I have found peace in knowing that justice was finally served for Elena and the other victims. The 16-year cover-up that protected a serial predator and enabled continued victimization has been completely exposed and punished. Elena has become a close friend and mentor as I process the trauma of learning that my parents were not the people I thought they were. She has helped me understand that children are not responsible for their parents' crimes, and that exposing the truth was the right thing to do, regardless of the family consequences. Her strength and forgiveness have inspired me to become an advocate for abuse survivors, myself. The other victims have also found some measure of healing through seeing my parents held accountable for their crimes. Several of them have told me that the trial and convictions helped them move forward with their lives and feel less alone in their experiences. Knowing that their abuser will spend decades in prison has given them a sense of safety and closure they had never experienced before. My relationship with my siblings has actually strengthened through this process. Initially, we all struggled with guilt and shame about our family, but we have learned to support each other and focus on breaking the cycle of dysfunction and abuse. We have all committed to being advocates for abuse survivors and to never allowing family loyalty to override moral responsibility. My parents' consequences have been swift and permanent. My father is serving his sentence in a maximum security prison where he is isolated from other inmates for his own protection, because crimes against children are not tolerated, even among criminals. He has aged rapidly and appears broken and defeated in the few photos that have emerged from prison. My mother is serving her sentence in a women's facility where she has reportedly struggled with depression and isolation. Other inmates know about her crimes and have made it clear that she is not welcome among them. She has written letters, begging for forgiveness, but I have not responded because her actions enabled years of continued abuse that could have been prevented. The church and community have implemented new policies for protecting children from predators in positions of trust. Elena has been involved in developing training programs to help people recognize signs of grooming and abuse. The scandal has led to important conversations about how institutions can better protect vulnerable children. My parents' former business building now houses a non-profit organization that provides services to abuse survivors. Elena serves on the board of directors, and the organization has helped dozens of families affected by sexual abuse and trauma. Something positive has grown from the ashes of my parents' criminal enterprise. The most important lesson I learned from this experience is that family loyalty should never require covering up crimes or enabling harm to innocent people. When parents or other family members commit serious crimes, exposing the truth is not betrayal, but rather moral responsibility. Children and vulnerable people must be protected, even when that protection comes at great personal cost. If you suspect that someone in your family or community is abusing children, please speak up and report your concerns to authorities. Abuse thrives in secrecy and silence, and predators count on people prioritizing family loyalty or social reputation over child safety. Every day that a predator is not reported is another day that children remain at risk. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was not who you thought they were? Share your thoughts about family loyalty versus moral responsibility in the comments below. How do we balance protecting family relationships with protecting innocent people from harm? If you are a survivor of sexual abuse or know someone who might be, please know that resources and support are available. Organizations like RAIN provide confidential support and can help connect survivors with local resources and advocacy services. It is never too late to report abuse or seek help for trauma. Like this video if you believe that people who cover up crimes against children deserve to face serious consequences. Subscribe for more stories about people who chose to expose the truth, even when it meant destroying their own families. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and protecting innocent people? Tell us about times when doing the right thing required incredible personal sacrifice.